Okay, so a new law. The California passed a new law effective January 1st, 2018, prohibiting employers from asking about prior wages, prior salary, and prior benefits that they had at their prior employer. So it's been passed. The prior law that was in place in 2017, we had this Equal Pay Act that was passed. Now, it still allowed employers to ask about prior salary, but with this new law that just took place, you can't ask about it. Now, applicants can voluntarily disclose the salary that they were earning, but you can't actively seek that information out. And one way to approach this that I recommend for a lot of new hires, ask about salary requirements and what kind of range are you looking for, things like that. But you can't specifically ask what they earned at their old employment. Key thing to remember here, some of the old forms you might have for applications, things like that, asking about prior salary, you need to take that off of those applications. And same with criminal background checks, and we'll talk about that next. So you need to go back through the applications, double check that you're not asking about any of this information that you can't ask about anymore. The other thing too that you need to be careful about now is your hiring managers. Make sure they know about this law. Train them and tell them to stop asking about that if they were asking about prior salary for applicants. One issue that's a little sleeper issue in this law is that it does require, if the applicant asks you for a pay scale for the position, that you need to provide a pay scale to the applicants. Now, the law doesn't set out that this pay scale has to be in writing, but you need to describe it to them. So for a particular position in the company, what's the pay scale that the company pays for that? And you need to be ready if somebody asks for that to provide it to them. Even though the law doesn't recommend or require that it be in writing, I do recommend that you provide it to them in writing to avoid any kind of disputes that it was never provided to them or what information you provided to them. So it's something to be thinking about right now and to put into place in case somebody asks for it. And again, train your managers. If somebody asks for this information, you need to provide it under this new law. Any questions on that before I move on? Okay. And I've got some pointers up here about the pay scale. I threw in the San Francisco local ordinance. I know we're Southern California franchisees, but just as a good example, San Francisco has a similar law that's effective July of this year. And so we're seeing local issues coming up on this front too. But now this basically has been, well, it's not as big of a deal now that the state put the law in place. But the trick is San Francisco has different requirements that the law on the state level doesn't have. You have to comply with the more restrictive ones. So if San Francisco says that pay scale has to be in writing, employers in San Francisco have to comply with San Francisco law. So you need to keep your eye on some of these local issues as well. Now, criminal history inquiries. This was the other big change in California law in 2018. Prior law was generally, employers were prohibited from asking about these types of criminal histories. And most applications had disclosures or disclaimers on them saying, hey, we're not asking about medical or marijuana convictions older than 2 years old and things like that. But now the new law changes this. You can't ask about criminal history background at all in California. So you need to take those questions off the application and train your managers not to ask about that. So basically, it prohibits the employers from asking any information that seeks any kind of disclosures of any kind of conviction history or any criminal background history at all.
So will we get in trouble though if we hire someone that was in jail and we hire them and they work for us for 6 months and they do something?
Well, that's a good question, yeah. So now could it create liability for like a negligent hiring kind of situation? And it's a good question. I think there could be an argument like, look, I couldn't ask about it, so I'm not negligent for not asking about it. Yeah, I think you could use this as a shield to defend yourself from a negligent hiring type of claim. Now, employers can still ask for this information, and we'll go through this. You have to go through this back and forth process with the applicant. Once you make a conditional offer to hire the person, you can do a background check on them. But then you have to get into some disclosures that I'll talk about here in a minute to go back and forth. So if you have a sensitive safety position where you really need to do a background check, you're probably still going to have to do it. Say you have somebody, it's not going to apply to this group, but say you have somebody going into people's homes or something like that to, for nursing care or something like that, they're probably still going to have to do background checks, but comply with the stringent requirements under this law going forward. One issue, I don't think it really applies to you guys either, but driver records, things like that, but in different contexts that might come into play. It raises some issues, but I think for you guys, for the most part, you probably don't need to be doing background checks on employees. So basically, yeah, and then this new law does have, if the employer does the background check and denies the employee the job, you have to actually provide the reason to the employee and provide the written notice to the applicant about why they're not getting the job and set this out in writing. So there's actually some forms that the state is publishing to help make these disclosures. So those should be coming up soon, I think, at least by the summer. And if you have any questions or are going to be doing background checks for employees, we can talk about it afterward, how to comply with this law. It's actually very detailed. I didn't want to bore everybody with all the detailed aspects of the disclosures. But anybody think they're going to be doing background checks still going forward? Okay, so that should be pretty easy then. Now, we had some regulations back in 2017 coming through on the state level that were really limiting employers' ability to do these in the first place, so we kind of saw that this was going to pass. But now with the new law, you can't ask about it.